Why? So you guys wanted to deep dive into this Bengaluru murder case, and I gotta say, even just the headlines, really chilling stuff, but then digging into this India Today report you sent, it's like every detail adds another layer of, I don't know, just complexity to this whole thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a story that gets under your skin. And as disturbing as some of the details are, I often find those details, they're really the key to kind of unpacking what went wrong.
Totally. So let's set the scene right. September 2024, we're in Bengaluru, India. And a young woman, Mahalakshmi, is found, and this is the tough part to even say, dismembered in a refrigerator in her own home. Can you imagine being the person to discover that? I mean,
Just horrific. It's a truly gruesome scene. And the fact that it was her own mother who found her. I mean, to process that kind of loss, the brutality of it all, while also trying to understand what happened, it's unimaginable.
and that's where this whole deep dive comes in, right? Because the prime suspect in all of this, her boyfriend, Mukti Ranjan Roy. But even that's not simple, because just days after they find Mahalakshmi's body, Roy himself is found dead, suicide in Odisha.
Yeah, it's like, you think you're following a straightforward path, and then suddenly you hit this wall. We have a victim, you have a suspect, but then the suspect is dead too. It's not a simple open and shut case by any means.
Right, like we have a suicide. But what led to this? What was the chain of events? What were the steps in between?
Exactly. And that's where really breaking down the timeline becomes crucial. If we look at what the report says, it seems like Mahalakshmi was actually murdered sometime between September 2nd and 3rd.
Okay, so very early in the month.
Yes. But her body, as we know, wasn't found until September 21st. So almost 3 weeks later.
3 weeks. So for 3 weeks, her family had no idea.
Exactly. And then just 4 days after that horrific discovery, Roy is found dead on September 25th.
So we're talking about a very short, very intense time frame for this whole thing to play out.
Absolutely. And that timeline, as you said, it throws up more questions than answers.
Yeah.
What was happening in those missing weeks? What brought them to this point? That's what we're here to figure out.
It's like you see those murder mystery boards, right? The pictures and the strings connecting everything.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're looking at that board, but someone just went crazy with the red string.
The tangled array.
All tangled up right in the middle.
Exactly. And we're stuck trying to figure out which thread to pull on first.
Totally. And it seems like the relationship between Mahalakshmi and Roy, that's like the big knot in the center of it all, right?
That's right.
We know they met working at the mall, started dating, but it wasn't exactly happily ever after, was it?
No, not from what we're seeing in this report. There's this recurring theme of pressure, of things escalating. And we can't forget that Roy, before he took his own life, he confessed to the murder. To his own mother, no less.
Whoa. Imagine being that mom, hearing that from your son.
Heavy stuff, no doubt about it.
Just heavy.
And what strikes me about that confession is the way he phrases things. He says he loved Mahalakshmi but felt trapped.
Yeah, those words, I feel like we need to underline them like 3 times each, because what does that even mean? Loved but trapped.
Right. It makes you question the whole nature of that love.
Exactly.
Was it actually love or something else entirely? Was it possessiveness, control, or was it genuinely feeling stuck, feeling like there was no way out?
And if he was trapped by what? By whom?
Right, and that's a huge piece of the puzzle we're missing.
And then there's this whole other layer to the story, this accusation that Roy made against Mahalakshmi, saying that she was threatening to frame him, ready for this,
Okay.
in a kidnapping case.
Kidnapping. Right.
Kidnapping. It's like, where did that even come from?
Out of left field.
Totally out of left field.
And unfortunately, the report doesn't really give us much to go on there.
No, it's just like, boom, kidnapping, moving on.
Exactly. Which leaves us with more questions than answers.
Like a million questions. Was this a legitimate threat that she made? Was there something else going on in their relationship that we're not seeing? Or was this Roy's way of trying to control the narrative, even in death?
It's definitely possible. And that question of his motive, it's a big one. Because if this kidnapping threat was real, did it push him over the edge? Did it contribute to what he did? We may never know.
It's so unsettling to think about.
It really is.
And speaking of unsettling, what are the police in Bengaluru saying about all of this?
Well, they were quoted in the report, and it sounds like they believe that Mahalakshmi was putting pressure on Roy to get married.
Okay.
And apparently this has been causing arguments between them.
Interesting. So we have this pressure to marry, maybe some family expectations playing into it.
Could be.
Societal norms, maybe.
Potentially all of those things swirling around.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that word pressure keeps popping up, doesn't it?
It does.
He felt trapped. There was pressure to get married.
It's like this heavy weight on everything.
Right, it's like this heavy atmosphere hanging over the whole situation. But the question is, was that pressure enough to push someone to murder? Or are we just trying to connect dots that aren't really there?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think we can say for certain with just the information we have. But what we can do is try to look at the bigger picture here. We have a young woman who's dead, brutally murdered, and we have a young man who took his own life, leaving behind this confession and a whole lot of unanswered questions.
And it's like we're trying to make sense of the senseless, you know?
Exactly. But I think even trying to make sense of it, even if we never get all the answers, that's important work.
Totally. Because maybe, just maybe, by looking at these different pieces, the pressure, the accusations, his side of the story, maybe we can start to understand how this tragedy unfolded.
And maybe even learn something that could help prevent something like this from happening again.
Exactly.
Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right?
Absolutely. It's hard, isn't it?
What's that?
To not get caught up in all the twists and turns. Like you said, this kidnapping angle, it's almost like a distraction.
It's definitely a big question mark hanging over everything.
Right. And it makes you wonder, are we focusing on the wrong things, missing the bigger picture?
It's a valid concern, for sure, especially when we're dealing with a situation where we're only getting one side of the story.
Exactly.
We have Rai's account, his version of events.
His truth.
Right. But what about Mahalakshmi's truth?
We don't have her side of the story. And without that, it's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Precisely. We can analyze what we have, look for patterns. But we have to acknowledge that without her voice, without her perspective, our understanding will always be incomplete.
And that's what makes this whole thing even more tragic, you know? Because it's not just about the violence, the act itself, it's about the silence that surrounds it, the silencing of a victim.
And that silence can be deafening. It can prevent us from seeing the warning signs, from understanding the complexities of these situations.
And that's why I think it's so important to keep talking about this, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's painful.
I agree. Because every time we shine a light on these issues, every time we refuse to let the silence win, we're taking a step towards a safer, more just world.
Absolutely. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from all of this deep dive into the Bengaluru murder case. It's not just about the headlines. It's about remembering that behind every story, behind every tragic detail, there are real people.
With
real lives that were cut short.
Well said. Well said.
Thanks for taking this journey with us, you guys. It's been tough, but important. And as always, keep those questions coming. We'll keep digging for answers. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.